Hey, it's Wednesday. Welcome to the show. This is the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, your definitive leadership growth podcast. It's your opportunity to listen in to people from all different verticals of business and entrepreneurship, leadership, different areas of life. And we discuss leadership and life and get into all the things that will help to make you successful. Sometimes we learn from some people's failures, so that way you don't have to endure them yourself. So today I am very excited to have an amazing guest with me today, Mike Robbins. He's the author of 5 books, including Bring Your Whole Self to Work and We're All in This Together. He's a former pro baseball player. I'll let him share that story. He was drafted right out of high school, played at university, played for another pro baseball team. And then now he's turned into general leadership phenom. He consults on leadership and business growth. He's consulted with companies such as Wells Fargo, New York Times, Fast Company. And so, or he's been featured in some of those publications. He's consulted with Google and Microsoft and many other amazing companies. So I am stoked to have Mike with me today on the show. And with that, Mike Robbins, welcome to the Leadership Toolkit.
Thanks, Mike. We got Mike and Mike here. This
Mike,
should be good. Thanks for
Mike
having
and
me
Mike. And we're going to make some magic happen today. So it would be like magic mics, if you will. So, yeah. Hey, do me a favor. If you would share a little bit of your background. You have a really amazing and just rich background. I would love if you would share a little bit of that with the audience, and then how that led you into leadership and business and consulting and all of the things that you do. And I've listened to some of your speeches, just phenomenal. You and I are in alignment. So I'm stoked to have that conversation today.
Yeah, no, thanks, man. I appreciate being on in the conversation. So yeah, I grew up here in California, where I still live, San Francisco Bay Area. I was a baseball player, as you alluded to when you were introducing me. I did get drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees, but didn't sign a contract with them at that time because I got an opportunity to play baseball at Stanford, which is about an hour from where I grew up in Oakland. Went to Stanford, got a chance to pitch in the College World Series, which was a lot of fun, and then got drafted by the Kansas City Royals. And I did sign a pro contract at that point, which, Mike, as you know, the way it works in baseball, you get drafted by a major league team, whether it's the Royals or the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Cubs or any of the teams in the major leagues. You got to go in the minor leagues and try to work your way up to get to the big leagues. Unfortunately, for me, I got injured my 3rd season still in the minors. I went out to pitch one night. I threw one pitch. I tore ligaments in my elbow, blew my arm out. I was 23 at the time. I had started playing baseball when I was 7. 2 years, 3 surgeries later, I was forced to retire from baseball. Didn't know what the heck I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was pretty devastated by it, as you can imagine.
Sure.
But one of the things, as disappointed as I was when, baseball ended, and as much as I loved the game when I was playing, one of the things I had become most fascinated by, particularly by the time I got to college and was playing professionally, was I was fascinated by team dynamics. Like, I was on some teams sometimes where we had really good talent, really good players, but the team wasn't very good. Coach was weird, or guys had egos, or there was just there wasn't a good sort of vibe on the team, and we would underperform, which is super frustrating, right? Because you figure in sports, right? If you got the best players, you should have the best team. That wasn't always the case, because I was on some other teams, where the talent was decent and the team was fantastic. We would beat other teams that had better players than we did. And I was like, well, that's interesting. What is that? Was that the coach? Was that we didn't understand, although we talked about, we called it chemistry. No one knew exactly what the heck that was, but you knew when you had it, and you definitely knew when you didn't have it. And so when baseball ended for me and I got my first job, I was working in San Francisco for a tech company, just selling internet advertising in the early days. It was the late 90s .com boom time. I figured the business world, the real world, was going to be really different than the sports world. And it was. But that very first job I had, I realized, oh, that whole team chemistry thing, that's not a sports thing. That's a human thing. My manager was calling it culture. And I'm like, well, it's the same thing. It's all that intangible stuff. And so I worked for a couple different tech companies through the 90s into the early 2000s. The .com bubble burst. I lost my job. And then I was like, a mentor of mine said, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I was like, well, anything. He's like, if you didn't have to worry about paying the rent. I was like, well, I think I would start writing and speaking about teamwork, about leadership, about a lot of this intangible stuff that goes into being successful and fulfilled. stuff I didn't learn in school, but I definitely noticed all those years playing baseball. And I think it's relevant to the business world and the working world and just being an adult, And so
Sure.
this is the start of now year 25. I started my business in 2001 and, 26 years old. I didn't know anything about anything. There was no podcast. There was no social media. There was no influencers. There was just write articles, write books, give speeches, try to get on TV or on the radio. And that was kind of what I set out to do. And 24 plus years later now, I've written 5 books and lots of great companies like Google and Wells Fargo and Microsoft and eBay and Schwab bring me in to talk about leadership and talk about teamwork. And, I've done a lot of research now, and the world has obviously changed quite a bit in the last 2.5 decades, but that's kind of my story and how I got to doing what I'm doing these days.
It's awesome. I love listening to people's stories. I mean, that's one of the things that, and I joke because my audience, I'm always like, they probably know the top of my head better because I sit here and take notes as we're sitting talking. So I'm curious when it pertains to, leadership and team dynamics, can you pinpoint, I'm going to dive right into this, which one is more important? Is it more important to have a really powerful leader? Is it more important to have really strong culture or chemistry or synergy, as you mentioned? Does one of those outweigh the other when it comes to business?
I think they go together, right? So I think the leader's job, the leader has the most influence on the culture as any individual who's part of the team, right? So whether we're talking about the CEO or all the way down to a new manager who's managing individual contributors, that leader, he or she, the way that they talk, the way that they think, their mindset, their approach, their temperament, all of those things. If you take all the humans involved in that group, like again, a baseball team, the coach, the manager, the person in charge, that person in charge is going to have the most significant influence. Now, they are not solely responsible for that, because you can have a great leader with a terrible team and a bunch of people who have bad attitudes. On a sports team, it's your best player that's the second most important, right? It's Steph Curry, it's LeBron James, it's Tom Brady, it's, Barry Bonds. And if that person doesn't have a great attitude, if that person isn't a real team player in a business, again, you've got the leader and then you've got the person on the team who's considered to be the most talented, the most successful. On the sales team, it's the one who's generating the most revenue, like that. So those two individuals, in my experience, have the most individual influence over the culture. That said, they're not solely responsible. And again, if you have a great leader that really has the mindset of wanting to focus on culture, you have a great sort of best player on the team per se, who's a real team-oriented person, the chances of your team having a strong culture are much more significantly increased. However, it's really up to everybody. And so we've seen a lot of this, especially in the last 5 years since the pandemic, and with so many people working virtually, it's like, oh my goodness, wow. Now how do we facilitate relationships and connections and communication when like everyone's at home or people come into the office a couple times a week or we don't really see each other? It's like, whoa, those relationships, that communication, how people feel, how engaged people are, all of that plays a huge role. And for leaders to be successful, they need to be empowered by the team. So it kind of goes both ways.
So I absolutely agree with you. I agree with everything that you're saying. I'm curious. So, because one of the things, and we were talking just a little bit before, I love how sports and athletics parallels business.
Yeah.
When you're talking about, hey, like your best player, so often it's easy for them to have so much influence, both for positive or for negative. Yep. Often when we talk about that, you can have the best players, but then a rough team dynamic or poor results is from somebody like Ocho Cinco. Right. Back in there's a lot of people that he played for. Gosh, who was it? The Bengals, I think, at one point. Like everybody thought they were going to be awesome and do all this stuff, and we're going to put this guy out there and he's going to do everything. Well, it takes more than one player to carry that team. Right. I'm curious when you talk about, because I do want to define a couple of things when you're talking about the team dynamics, and you said early on, well, it's sort of these intangibles. Right? Yeah. How can we try and distill that down? Because as we have somebody that's listening, someone that's in leadership or management, and they say, okay, well, I want to build awesome team dynamics. And I want to
Yep.
have, I want to be able to have those B players that produce A plus results,
Right.
or however you want to word that.
Yep.
What are 2 or 3, maybe 4 things that you can try and distill down and pinpoint? Okay, well, your team needs to have these characteristics, or they need to have these things that you could maybe have somebody wrap their arms around. Is that something you could do for me?
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't want to answer your question with a question, but I'll just share a little
Sure.
story and then get back to it, in the sense that, like, I often start when I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of, like yesterday I was in Washington, D.C., giving a keynote at this company kickoff event. I love doing that. But about 30% of the engagements that I do with our clients aren't big speeches. It's me actually sitting with a team,
Hmm.
sometimes an executive leadership team, sometimes a senior, but an intact team of people who actually work together. And one of the questions that I start those sessions with, Mike, is I'll have everyone go around the table as they're sort of introducing themselves to me. And I'll just say, what do you think, in your personal lived experience, what makes a great team great? And
That's
people,
a good question.
right? It's a basic question, but it's like, you've been on some great teams. You think about the best team you've ever been a part of. Why was that team so great? And people say stuff like trust. They say stuff like, we were passionate about what we were doing. The vision was clear. We had each other's backs. We had fun together. We cared about, people took responsibility. Again, it's all this intangible stuff. It's very rarely, oh, everybody was wicked smart, or everyone went to the best schools, or everyone had worked at really great companies before they came to that company, whatever. It's not, it's all the intangible stuff. So I say all of that because everyone listening, everyone watching us right now, it's like, you've been on a great team in your life, whether it was way back when you were growing up and you played sports, or you were at the church, or you were a part of some club, or whether it was in school or in your professional career. You want to start to really distill down in your experience, what were some of those qualities? Another way to think about this, would you talk about leadership, right? In your Leadership Toolkit podcast here, it's like, you think about the best leaders you've ever worked for or with. What qualities did they have? The things that I hear most often and I think are fundamental: trust is fundamental, communication is fundamental, right? A sense of collaboration, a sense of people actually rooting for each other, caring about each other, wanting people to do well. That's super important, right?
Mhm.
And an ability to have hard conversations, right? That's connected to the trust, but ultimately great teams talk to each other, not about each other.
Oh, that's a
So,
good line.
Mike, if you and I are teammates, we may not like each other. We may not be best friends. We might have very different styles. But if we don't have the ability to have an issue and bring it up directly, and I say, hey, Mike, I disagree with that, or hey, I didn't particularly like the way that you said that to me, or hey, what about this thing, or hey, the results aren't where we want them to be. If we can't have that conversation respectfully and effectively, that's not only going to impact our relationship personally, one-on-one, that's actually going to impact the team. Because if I go to Susie and tell Susie, Mike's not communicating with me, or Mike was mean to me at the meeting, or whatever, and then
Right.
Susie goes, I know Mike's a jerk, and then we go to lunch and we talk about you, and that's not only like rude and disrespectful to you and going to damage my relationship with you and Susie's relationship with you, that's actually a problem for the whole team now.
Well, and then it mushrooms out, right?
Right.
It's like they say, cancer spreads, so that it's
Right.
like you start those water cooler talks, and we go, oh, this person did this, or like the game of telephone,
Right.
right? I love comparing stuff in business, because somebody may say something. You may say something as simple as, "Hey, I don't like the way Mike said this to me,"
Right.
and then fast forward, it turns into, Mike's this massive jerk that was taking another run at Mike Robbins, and why would he even do that? And he was, it turns
Right.
into your mama jokes, and you're like, well, I wasn't even there, right?
Right.
So a couple of things that I'm hearing you say, and I always try to repeat this just to make sure that I'm hearing it correctly. And I love the way you worded this, Mike. There were 4 things you mentioned. You said trust, communication, collaboration, and then the ability to have hard conversations, so candor, probably, right?
Yep.
And I think those 4 things come up both when it comes to qualities of a leader
Sure.
and the qualities of a positive team.
Yeah.
One of the things, as you were talking, I was thinking about communication, and we talk about how, sports skirts business. It's like in sports, I played hockey for 20 years. And it's one of those things you're constantly yelling across the floor, yelling across the ice if it's inline hockey or ice hockey, so that your teammates know where you're at and they know where you're headed. And the irony is, I think often when we get into business, we lose that, and you brought it up, especially like in the workplace with it being so fragmented.
Yep.
When it comes to, online work and work from home stuff or social media. I talk about social media all the time because it's one of those things that it's a great tool, but it's also a great separator, right? Yep. It's something that it's like you lose. Can you have a personal relationship with someone on social media? Yes. But is it the same as having that one-on-one face-to-face? You said, hey, like if Susie and you go to lunch, that's a different experience. Right. So, when you're talking about some of these, I want to dive into two that you brought up specifically, because you said trust quite a bit and we have to trust each other. And I think a lot of people would agree when it comes to, business teams, when it comes to leadership, you want to trust the people that are in your circle that you're either serving with or that you are serving if you're in a leadership role. What are some ways that you think people can develop trust?
Well, I mean, we have to be willing to share about ourselves, what matters to us, what are our values. Again, some people are more private than others, but if you think about the people that you trust in life, either at work or outside of work, one of the reasons you trust them is because they've shared some things about themselves with you. They've been willing to be vulnerable with you. Admitting when we make mistakes is a weird way that actually really does bode trust, if you will. It builds trust. Not again, there's personal credibility and there's professional credibility. If I keep making mistakes over and over again, you're going to start to go, that guy Mike doesn't know what he's doing, or he's not very good at the work, right? Which may be true. But if I'm willing to say to you, hey, Mike, I screwed this up, or I'm not very good at this, or I could use some help on this, what that's going to do is build more personal credibility. Like, hey, this guy has some self-awareness. He knows what he's good at and what he's not good at. He's willing to admit when he made a mistake. All of those things go into going, I can trust him, because when he says yes, he means yes. When he says no, he means no. When he says, I think I know what I'm doing here, I can trust that at least he thinks he knows what he's doing. Whether he does or not is another thing. But I think a lot of us have learned in life how to kind of BS our way through things, which is a survival skill that we all have to have, and have that sort of club in the bag, if you will. But you can't build trust with another human by trying to schmooze them or trying to kind of spin things all the time. That gets really old really fast. And most of us, even those of us that think we're pretty good liars or pretty good salespeople, or we can put on a good show, after a while it gets exhausting for us. And the other person eventually sees and then goes, wait a minute, what the heck is going on here?
No, absolutely. So that leads me to a couple questions. One, I don't want to leave just yet. And I do love that. There's a certain level of, and I've talked with a lot of leaders about trust specifically. And one of the things that I'm hearing you say is when you're coming in from a leadership standpoint, you have to be willing to have some level of vulnerability to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think so often people think, well, you're in the leadership role, or you're in the manager role, or you're the tip of the spear, so to speak, right? And so they expect, well, Mike Robbins, he must know the answer. And you go, well, time out. As much as we'd like everybody to think that, it's okay to bruise your ego a little bit and be a little bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
And say, hey, I don't know.
I mean, people respond to the truth. And look, at the same time, I like to make the distinction between what I call cockpit conversations and loudspeaker conversations, right? Like I flew home last night from Washington, D.C., back to California where I live. And there was some turbulence on the flight. I don't like turbulence. I fly a lot, but I don't like when the plane starts, right? Yeah. What I appreciate when there's turbulence on the plane is if I get a heads up from the cockpit, like, hey, we're going to hit some bumps. We're going to put the seatbelt sign on. We're going to tell the flight attendants this. It's helpful when sometimes they don't know. It just comes out of nowhere.
Sure.
But it is helpful to get, oh, hey, sorry, we didn't see that. Here's what, and the updates, like this is what's happening. We're going to move to a different altitude. We're going to, right. If they don't communicate, then I start to get more nervous. Like what's going on? I'm looking around. I'm looking for the flight attendants. Do they look nervous? Because
right.
What I do not want to hear, and thankfully I've yet to ever hear, and I hope I never hear from the cockpit, is like, oh my gosh, this is really bad turbulence. I'm really scared up here. And by the way, this is only my second time flying an airplane. I'm not really that good at this yet. I don't really know whatever. I don't want to hear any of that. Now, let's just say
Right.
it is really bad. Let's say the pilot or the co-pilot, it is only their, they've passed all their training, but they're relatively green. I hope they're having that conversation with each other and with the
Right.
people on the ground who are going to land the plane. Like, do you know what I mean? So they can have the conversation in the cockpit of like, hey, something's not going right. Something's weird. This is hard. This is different. We have to adjust, whatever. Tell the truth to each other. Hey, I'm actually feeling a bit nervous and overwhelmed by this situation. Can you help me out? Or whatever. I have a cold today. I'm not at my best. All the things that they would all need to know to land the plane and keep us all safe. Communicate with us as openly and transparently as they can about what's happening, when it's going to happen, what they're doing. And there are times when I talk to leadership teams, I'm like, look, let's have a cockpit conversation in this room right now about what's really going on. And people can lower the waterline on the iceberg, as I like to say, and tell the truth. Like, I'm really struggling with this. I really screwed that up. I don't know what the hell's happening, whatever. But then we leave, or you know, it's that notion of sort of divided together, united apart. Like, you leave the room or you get off the Zoom and it's like, look, we're going to be a united front with the rest of the team, the larger team, that here's where we're headed, even though we still have some internal debates about the best approach. Because that is, the more senior you get as a leader, like, that becomes really important and a really challenging aspect. So this is a long way, Mike, to say it's important for leaders to have relationships both with the folks who report to them and the person they report to, but especially their peers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think that's really, really powerful. And one of the things that I'm hearing you say when you're talking about, you brought up a few things there that I think are just massive, because I think we fall into the trap in business and in leadership that because of those outside forces, people think that we know, people expect us to know, that then we try to baffle people with BS, like we were saying a minute ago. Hey, you can, and one of the things that you said is when you're having those conversations, when you're firing up or when you're looking out to your peer group, that you have that united front. When you're going to present that to, and again, this has just been sort of my approach, and I'm hearing you say this, when you're going to present that to the greater group, the rest of the company, the rest of the department or whatnot, it's really important that you do have a plan, that you remove some of the emotion. It's okay to be scared, but that's one of those things. I've interviewed a few people where they're like, look, when you go after it and do it, and if you're scared or you don't know, what do you do? And they're like, well, you just do it scared. You just go. But it's important that you don't go and portray that to everybody else, because an emotion like that has a way of compounding. Right. And so, if you're, we've always said at work in the past that it's like, okay, if I catch a cold as the leader, my team's likely to catch pneumonia. So, it compounds itself.
Well, and on that note, Mike, I think I'm glad you brought that up, because this is where, look, leadership, as you know, and you teach, is hard. It takes quite a bit. And so let's say, again, you have the situation where you're scared. It happens. Like, we're human. We're going to get scared.
Sure.
There's no, like, I often like to say, like, the only point at which we will find ourselves in a situation where we have no fear is once we're dead. So part of being human is that we're going to get nervous. Sometimes we're going to get significantly nervous. Like, for a living, for the last 24 years, going into my 25th year this year, I get up on stage in front of other humans to speak publicly, which often terrifies most people. Sure. People often say to me, it's amazing that you have no fear when you get up there. I'm like, what are you talking about? I still have fear. Now, it's different today than it was 25 years ago. But like yesterday, I got on stage in Washington, D.C., like, I hadn't spoken in a few weeks. It was the holidays, and I get up and I'm like, oh, woo, okay. Like, let me just kind of, it's like back when I was pitching, like, I would get out on the mound. I was good at it. I really loved it, but I had to manage, how do I deal with the emotions, and how do I deal with the physical and physiological sensations that go through my body like every other human? We've got to figure that out. I mean, I sometimes think about this, it's like, the president of the United States, whoever that president may be, has to get up and give speeches in front of the whole world. Someone is doing the opening monologue at the Oscars or whatever. And I sometimes will think, like, what's it like inside that human's body, even though they've done a lot of things in order to be in that position? Or the CEO that gets up at the big company kickoff event and is talking about the strategy or the changes or whatever. So the thing, though, that we have to figure out how to do, Mike, is how do we deal with the reality of that fear without then getting it all over everybody? right? To your cold analogy, it's like, how do I take care of myself so that I don't get everybody sick? But sometimes there are going to be situations where I might have to show up still with a little bit of a cold, but I don't need to freak out about it. And you know what I mean? So it's a lot of managing both of those things. And sometimes being able to talk to your peers or talk to a coach or talk to a mentor or talk to your spouse or someone so that you can get in the right state of mind to go do the thing.
Yes.
That can really be beneficial.
Absolutely. And one of the things I was sharing with you before the show, and I've shared this before, I think it's really relevant as we're having this conversation. My daughter's a competitive gymnast,
right.
And so she does flips and stuff on a little 4-inch beam.
Goodness.
And like my heart,
yeah.
you have, as a parent, are you kidding me?
I can't even imagine. I get all stressed out watching the Olympics and I'm thinking, I can't even imagine the parents. So yeah.
So it's nuts. One of the things that I've talked to her about, and this is probably about the time she was 8 or 9 years old, and she started doing stuff that I was like, this is nuts. Yeah. So like, as you're saying, cause I still, I'll go up to speak and do something. I'll still get butterflies. Sure. And part of that I associate with, well, one, it means I care about how I perform, and so I was relating that to my daughter. If you get butterflies, it's okay. It means it's cause you care about how you perform, how you produce. Yeah. The other thing that I've advised is, well, then you got to reframe it, right? What are the differences? What are the physiological differences between fear and excitement? A lot of them are the same. You get butterflies, you get cold sweats, you get all this. So reframe that and know, okay, I care about this. Let me reframe this and talk to myself differently, because you're going to have to go do it scared anyway. So let's turn it into excitement. Let's turn it into joy. Let's turn it into what are some of those other things. And I think it's so powerful how we can talk to ourselves.
Totally. Well, and to your point, it really is the big difference. I mean, you just made this example, like physiologically, it's almost exactly the same. It's the story in our head that's different. Right. And it becomes, is. I mean, again, you think about sports, it's like I've always been fascinated too by athletes. There are those athletes that just like rise to the occasion.
Yes.
And they're not always, I mean, a lot of times it's amazing when like a really great athlete also happens to be a really great clutch athlete. Like they show up in those big moments. Hard to do. Right.
Oh, well, I'm a Denver Broncos fan. So we like to say that's a fourth quarter team.
Yes, exactly. But it's interesting because and then there are certain people, if you watch enough sports, you'll notice there are certain people, it's like the postseason shows up and all of a sudden it's like, what? Madison Bumgarner now looks like a Hall of Famer, or Jimmy Butler looks like the best player in the NBA. And it's like, those are athletes that for some reason, when the lights get really bright, all of a sudden it's like, and then you have, again, if you follow baseball, it's like Clayton Kershaw has been the best pitcher in baseball for almost 20 years, has had a lot of challenges in the postseason, or Barry Bonds up until towards the end of his career was the best player in baseball and then didn't have much success in the postseason. And again, This is not to throw anyone under the bus, but it becomes this thing of like, if you think about leadership from that standpoint, it is about how do I show up in those moments when it's really required that I'm present, that I'm engaged, that I'm there. And that's not so much about skill. It's not even about experience all the time, although experience can both help or hinder us. It really is about a willingness to be able to meet the present moment.
Well, and absolutely. And to still show up, because it doesn't matter if you have one person watching or 1,000 watching all of the time. Somebody's watching. They're taking it in. They're learning from you. They're gauging. If you're in that role, whether it be, on the leadership stage or management stage or on a stage speaking, people are watching. They're watching for the reaction. They're watching for the emotion, the strength, or the weakness.
Right.
They're watching to see how, and a lot of people will gauge how to react based on how you react as a leader.
Totally. And there's no insignificant acts when you're a leader.
Absolutely. So one thing I want to ask, because you brought up a few times, you said, okay, and we've talked about this just briefly, like, hey, what if I am fearful of something? What if I realize I'm not very good at something? What if I know that I struggle with this and I'm willing to admit that? What if you have something that you're not very good at? You get assigned to do it either by a superior or you by default, right? How do you approach that, Mike? Do you take and you find somebody that is good at the thing and you try and recruit them in? Do you spend time on yourself? If you find in a leadership role, hey, I know I'm not good at this thing that I need to get done, what is your approach to tackle that?
Yeah. Look, I think there's a couple things. I mean, I think the first thing, it starts with telling the truth. So we don't want to be hypercritical of ourselves, because a lot of times I think our assessment of ourselves can be off one way or the other. We think we're worse at something than we are. We think we're better. Both are problematic for different reasons. So as best as we can, we want to try to honestly assess, okay, this, whether I'm good or not, this is a challenge for me. I don't find this to be very easy. I don't have a lot of confidence in this particular thing. That's usually pretty true, if that is, right? And in that case, then the question becomes, okay, what can I do? I mean, maybe it literally is coming back to the person who assigned us with the thing and say, look, not like an excuse, but I'm not very good at this. So is there someone else you could assign it to, or is there someone you could assign it to along with me? But let's just say, for the sake of this discussion, that's not an option. We got to do the thing. Then it's like, okay, who can I ask for help and support from on this? There are other people either on the team or in the company or maybe outside who are good at this, who are better than me at this, who have more, like one of my favorite sayings is, I didn't invent this problem.
Right.
Meaning, right? So someone else has dealt with this, now this specific task, but also being assigned something they're not very good at and having to get it done. So you can both go get practical help from someone about the thing, but also you might be able to get some help from, like, what do you do when you get assigned something that you're not very good at and you have to deliver on it anyway? And then again, being as open and transparent about that and collaborative as you can. Again, look, every situation is a little different. You might be new to the job or new to the manager, or you don't feel safe enough to be able to raise your hand and go, hey, I'm not very good at this. You're still going to need to get some help, because the thing you don't want to do is fake it or just hope it all works out, because that's usually not the best strategy. And, we get ourselves into trouble doing that. And most of the time, I mean, especially with technology these days, like Google it, go on ChatGPT, go on YouTube. I mean, you can find lots of resource for it, even if you're stuck in a place where you don't have anyone to call and there's no other humans that you're connected to that you think would know this thing. There's so much resource today. I mean, again, if it was 20, 30 years ago, not the same conversation.
Absolutely. Well, and I think you ask a really powerful question there, is just simply, I think that we need to take some time sometimes as leaders to be introspective and step back. You take one step back, and I would encourage anybody to write this down, is just asking the question, who can I turn to on this?
Yeah.
Whatever the task is, who can I turn to? It's another one of those things. You said earlier, I wrote it down, what makes a great team great, right?
Yeah.
That's one of those simple questions. If you didn't write it down, go write that down. If you didn't write this down yet, who can I turn to help seek a solution on this? Write that down. One thing, and I always get further into the show than I want to, Mike, before I do this, but I'm going to make sure to share this with everybody, both on the audio podcast, and if you're watching right now, I'm going to put this on the screen. If you're enjoying the conversation with Mike, make sure you do check out his website. Go to mike-robbins.com. It's ROBBINS.com. And so he's got his books there. Like I said, author of 5 books. He's got a link to his podcast. I'm going to have you expand on that a little bit on your podcast. So make sure that you go check out his website. If you want to book him to speak, if you want to buy a book, if you want to connect with him in any way, you've got everything there. The website's really well done, if I do say so, because I've looked at a lot of them from time to time. Also, if you want to connect with Mike more one-on-one, go to LinkedIn, linkedin.com/n/M Robbins, MROBBINS, and you can find Mike there on LinkedIn and connect with him that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And do me a favor. Would you share a little bit? Because you podcast, you speak as well. You do a lot of these things. Do share a little bit about your podcast. What is your podcast and what does it cover?
Yeah, the current podcast.
Yes.
I've been podcasting for quite a while, like you, Mike. The one that I started in 2016 is now called We're All in This Together, which is the title of my most recent book. And, we've done about 400 episodes. The first probably 200 were a lot of interviews. So like the conversation you and I are having. So I would talk to business leaders and thought leaders and change makers and folks. But the last sort of 200, it's usually just me. So the episodes are 20, 30 minutes long. And I'm usually just sharing, like I did an episode earlier today that was just about how do we effectively set goals and intentions for the new year, both at work with our teams, but also personally. So it's a lot of topics around leadership, around authenticity, around sort of personal as well as professional success and development. And I also, what I find over the years, Mike, is like, if I'm struggling with something or I'm trying to figure something out, other people are too. And so I'll often just share, hey, this is what I've been struggling with, or this is what I've been thinking about, or this is what I've been reading or listening to. And here's how it's relating to some of what's going on for me in my business, with my clients, at home with Michelle, my wife, and our teenage daughters, or whatever. And that's a lot of what I share about on the podcast.
No, I love it. I love the title. We're all in this together. I'm curious, because you brought up, you said, hey, I just did one on goals and intentions into a new year. Do you find, and I'm just curious about this, because this is something I've struggled with. I was on a radio show, I want to say 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, went on and their whole theme was all about New Year's resolutions, resolutions. And they ended up titling the show Resolutions Don't Work, because I just hammered on it.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, sort of, what is your take as we are headed into the new year? You're actually my first show of this new year.
Yeah.
So thank you again for coming on.
Yeah.
Just, the 3 or 5 minutes, I won't have you give away your whole show, but I love the fact that you're talking about goals and intentions. So go tune into his podcast. But do you find, like, what is the turning point? Is it just all of a sudden magically January 1st, stuff turns over? How prepared should leaders be? What is the approach that you recommend they take as we're headed into a new year for new business, new you, whatever?
I mean, I think, look, it's arbitrary, right? And depending on the company, I mean, some of our clients are on a fiscal year that starts July 1st. So,
sure.
You know what I mean? But usually, and then retail companies, like, the first day of the year is February 1, because they don't close the books from the year before. So,
right.
But here's the thing, and I was making this point on my podcast episode earlier today, Mike, is at work, if we work for any size company, I mean, it's not just our own small business that we set the parameters. If you work for a company that has more than 20 people, and especially if it's a big corporation,
right,
you are going to be handed some kind of budgeting planning process as a manager, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's going to at least be handed to you. I mean, especially if you're in something like sales, they're going to go, here's your sales quota for the year. And now you got, right. We do this at work, whether we like it or not, begrudgingly or not. We understand a business has to have a target or a budget or a plan for revenue and for expenses. And then we have to, every month or every quarter, like, true up to how are we doing compared to the plan. And then the year turns over, whether it's on January 1st or July 1st or some other date, it turns over and we look back. How did we do last year? And what are we going to do this year? Right. That's the season that we're in right now. Like, I just spoke at this kickoff meeting. I'm going to be at another kickoff meeting next week in Florida. I mean, that's right. But in our lives personally, sometimes people make New Year's resolutions. And to your point, they often don't work, because it's like, I'm going to eat less. I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to get more sleep. I'm going to put my phone down. And I think, I mean, in and of themselves, there's all this data that shows, like, at a certain point in January or by February, most resolutions have gone out the window. However, I think choosing whether it's on January 1st or on our birthday or on some other important day to have some intentions that we really want to focus on. The way I break it down is there's intentions. That's like, how do I want to feel? You could think of it even in a business as like, what are some of our values? How do we want to operate? What are we trying to do here? What's the purpose of what we're doing? They're not tangible as much as they're more aspirational. So you might have an intention to be, a better communicator, let's say, or to be healthier, or to be, have more financial abundance, whatever it is. Then we go down to the next level is a goal, which a goal, like in the business terms, we would say that's a KPI, a key performance indicator, an outcome, something we're trying to accomplish. Again, the revenue goal is, $10 million or something for the company. My personal quota is I got to sell $500,000. There's a number. That's an outcome. That's a goal. And then the next level down is actions or practices. That's stuff we're going to do. The thing about goals and outcomes, we can't control those 100%. You could work really, really hard, and there could be other factors at play. You're not going to produce the result no matter how hard you try, because, I don't know, there's headwinds or the economy goes down or whatever. But the actions are 100% up to us. So, like, I'm going to get up at this time. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to get in front of my computer. I'm going to send this many proposals or make this many phone calls, or whatever the heck, their actions. Sure. And so again, if you think about it in those different categories, I think on a personal level, it can be helpful. And when you think about it as a leader, You're going to be inside of a structure based on how the company is organized and how the budgeting and planning process goes. But what you want to try to do is really wrap your arms around those goals as best as you can and own them, and then share them with the team in a way that they own them as well. So people can see what their daily activities and daily actions, how they connect to those goals. Because if they can't see that, then the goals are meaningless.
Man, I've had that conversation a lot of times where it's like, okay, whether if you tune into a football game, a baseball game, any sort of, and I know we keep coming back to these sports analogies, but when you tune in there, what's one of the first things you do? Check the score.
Yeah.
Right. If there's no score, it's short lived. And so I think it's really a valuable point you make. You're saying, hey, you got to sell the vision. You got to keep people on the map, headed in the direction or on the path towards those goals. And a few of the things, because you broke this down, and I want to repeat it so that people get it and make sure to write that down. When you're talking intentions, those are the intangible. They're not measurable. You're saying like better, healthier, lose weight. That's there's not necessarily a number or a KPI attached.
Right.
And then, the goals and the KPIs, that gets down to the tactical sort of measurable results.
Yeah.
And then I love the fact when you're saying, hey, like the actions, you control what you do. It's one of those things. I did a blog, years ago called Running Your Life on Double A's, Actions and Attitude, right? Because those are two things you have complete control over.
Totally.
I have complete control over my actions. I have complete control over my attitude towards those things. And so I think that's really strong that you bring those up as we're sitting here talking today.
Well, and think of it like this, just to complete that thought. It's like, okay, we're starting the new year. Let's just say someone has an intention to be healthier, right? That's often a big, want to be healthier. Okay, well, there's a lot of different ways you could be healthier, but then I'm going to take a specific measurable result called, I want my body weight to be X, or I want my blood tests to come back with these numbers. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Those are outcomes. You can't control those outcomes per se. You can want those to happen, but you can definitely track them. You go to the doctor, get your blood done, you get on a scale, you look at it, and then you go, okay, by the end of the year or by mid-year, I want these to be here, but you're clear about it. Then you go to, what am I going to do today? Or what are my daily actions? Or what are my weekly actions? I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do yoga. I'm going to, eat these types of foods and not eat these other types, again, without getting too weird about the whole thing. Sure. That's how it really works. My intention is to be healthy. The specific measurable results I'm going to track to see how I'm doing are going to be these things. By the way, you were talking about sports earlier. That's just the scoreboard. That's not the game. The game is what happens on a daily basis. What am I doing? And in this case, we're talking about being healthier. So what am I eating? How am I moving my body? How much am I sleeping? How much am I hydrating? All the things. And the thing is, you don't have to be a nutritionist or a personal trainer we all know enough about nutrition and fitness. We've had enough life experience walking around in this body. It's not like we can't learn more, but we know enough what to do to be relatively healthy. The hard part is actually doing it.
And and the consistency to maintain it. Yeah.
And having some accountability. I mean, I'll say this too, in a different context. So I've written 5 books, as you've mentioned. Yes. I'm super proud of that. I'm grateful for my books, but I'm someone who does not really like to write. And I tend to procrastinate when I write. When I was in college, when I was in high school, I was like the stay up all night to write the paper the night before it was due thing that would drive everyone around me crazy. That's how I operate. I say this because anyone listening or watching us, the only way that I've been able to write 5 books, and even 1 book, let alone 5, is accountability. That's it.
Is it personal accountability, or you have other people to hold you accountable?
Mostly other, so the way it works, I mean, you could self-publish a book or you can publish it with a publisher. In all 5 cases for me, I had a publisher, which meant they literally paid me money up front and I signed a contract and they said, the manuscript is due by this date.
Oof, that's
and then
pressure.
It's like, oh, again, talk about the thing earlier when you say someone asked you to do something you don't know how to do. That's how I felt not only the first time, but almost every time. I'm like, what the hell did I say yes to this for? This was a terrible idea. But I say that because then I had to break it down into, okay, I can't write a book in a day. I can only write a sentence or a section or right, whatever. And then creating the accountability and the support around me that I need in order to get that done. And I had to learn somewhat the hard way on what that looked like. But the thing is, like, I use that as an example because I meet a lot of people who say, I want to write a book or I want to run a marathon or whatever. And I'll just say, okay, if there's a big gap between where you are and that thing you want to accomplish, you don't have to all of a sudden become some person that you're not overnight, but you're going to need a lot of support, a lot of learning and coaching and feedback. And then ultimately it's going to be accountability, right? Back to the fitness thing. It's like, I want to go to the gym 3 times a week. Okay, well, how about you meet someone at the gym 3 days a week? Then you'll probably go because your friend's going to be pissed at you if you don't show up.
Absolutely.
Right? Or you hire a trainer. I'm going to meet with the trainer once a week and you're paying that person. Now it's like, am I going to really just write the check or spend the money and not do it? No, I'm going to go even if I don't feel like it. Like my wife has a trainer at the gym and she'll often call me and go, I'm on my way to the gym. I don't want to go, but I'm going. And then she's never in a bad mood when she comes home.
Right. There's so much in life that works that way. You just show up and it brings you to that space, right? It brings you to a positive space and a good mindset.
Yep.
One thing that you brought up, and just in this time I've spent talking with you, I love your presentation style. You're very direct, you're very clear, you're very confident in the way you speak. And one of the things that you brought up is you said just a moment ago, you said, well, you have to be clear on what you want. Do you have any tactical, because this is something I've been cornered on this in my life. Well, Mike, you got to get clear on what you want. What do you want? Do you have any, practical tools that you use for yourself, a couple or 3 steps, or what's the method that you use to be able to, 1, get yourself clear in what you want, in the direction you're headed, and 2, again, just in your communication style, bring that into being able to communicate that so clearly?
Well, let me say this. I thank you for the acknowledgement.
Yeah.
I do talk a lot, and sometimes, it's what I jokingly, when my girls say, Dad, you talk too much, I say, well, your dad actually gets paid to talk, so let's be grateful. But I think that it's okay when I say it's important to be clear. We're not always going to be clear, so that's something to remember. There's times we're going to be more confused. I don't know exactly what I want. I'm a little spun around. Maybe I'm listening to lots of people, or I'm looking out at the world. And so look, it's a process. It's an ongoing evolutionary process for us. It changes as we age. It changes as our life changes. I think one way to help get clear on what we want is, or what we're headed to, or kind of what the goal is
yes.
Again, what brings me joy? What do I enjoy? There's the reality of the responsibilities I got to pay the bills. I got to take care of myself and my family. So there's that reality. These things are needed. But then inside of that, what do I enjoy doing? What brings me joy? What comes easy to me? What do I lose myself in? Those can sound kind of like squishy questions, but they're really important. When I'm coaching someone, I'll often look for, when do they really get alive in the conversation? I'm like, ooh, we're just talking about something. You just got excited. What was that? And they're like, I don't even know. But then we start to dig a little deeper. What is that thing? I'll ask people, when were some of the times in your life you felt most alive? You felt most inspired? You felt most engaged? What was going on? And so again, sometimes it's just a process of questioning. I also find it to be really helpful to have a coach, to have a mentor, to have people around us, to have a mastermind group, if you can, people that you can bounce stuff off of, because everybody needs that, right? Michael Jordan needed Phil Jackson, and he was the greatest basketball player of all time. But you need someone that can give you feedback and see you from the outside, that you can bounce off of, so that you can keep re-clarifying for yourself, where am I at? Where do I want to be?
I love that. So and I think that's important. There's a lot of people I interview that it's like, get a mentor, get a coach, the trusted friend thing. I struggle with, because you really have to know, there are people I'm very close to. I have one very trusted, very close friend. He's actually who encouraged me to restart this podcast a couple of years ago. And it's because I know he will have that very straightforward, don't be a dumbass, here's what you need to do. He'll tell me those hard truths. But I think a lot of times the trusted friend can betray us, not intentionally,
right?
Because they want to, they want you to feel good about yourself. They want to, there's some fluff associated. So I think it's really powerful.
It can also be, sometimes they'll blow smoke because they don't want us to get mad at them. Other times, the dark side,
friends.
The dark side of it, though, too, is sometimes they'll get jealous or envious. So again, we're all human. So it's like, Mike, if you and I are friends and we're supporting each other, and all of a sudden you have this massive success, I might be like, hey, good for you, man. But inside I'm like, oh, now I feel bad about myself. Or if I'm concerned about you and I come and say, hey, Mike, I think you're missing this. Now I'm putting our friendship at stake by me saying that thing. So again, it's not impossible. It's just, it takes a certain amount of strength and courage and stability in that, solidity in that friendship for us to, I have some friends like that, which I'm grateful for.
Sure.
But the people where it's a mentor or it's someone, a coach that I've hired, I've literally said to them, I am paying you money to challenge
Give
me.
it to me.
Please do not blow smoke. I do not need that. That's not why I'm paying you money, is for you to tell me how great I am all the time. I want you to challenge me. I want you to help me get better. Again, it's why a good sports coach, while they do want to create a healthy, positive locker room, but sometimes they yell at the best player because that's what's needed in that moment, either in front of everybody or behind closed doors in the locker room. And it's like, that's what's needed.
100%. Well, we're coming to the tail end here, Mike, and with respect for your time, a couple of quick reminders for everybody, and I'll give you a minute to think on this, but I'll ask you just if you have any final thoughts you want to take us out with. Some reminders for the audience. One, check out Mike's. I've loved the conversation, and I'm sure that my audience has as well. Check out his website. It's mike-robbins.com. So make sure you can go there. You want to book him to speak. You want to listen to his podcast. You want to buy any one of his 5 books. You want to tune into a few. You have some YouTube links on there, which have just some awesome content. So make sure, please go check out Mike's website. Also, you want to connect more one-on-one, go to linkedin.com/in/M Robbins. M as in Mike Robbins. And so any final thoughts to take us out there, Mike, and then I'll take us out of the show.
The thing that came to my mind, Mike, given everything we've been talking about, is I think it's important for all of us, and especially everybody listening, watching as leaders, to be kind to ourselves. It is hard being a leader. There's challenges. We want people who are going to call us out and point out blind spot, all the things. But I think a lot of people that I work with, a lot of really smart, talented, high achieving people, myself included, I would say this, and maybe Mike, you can relate to this. We have a tendency to be really hard on ourselves in ways that at times don't serve us. Because holding ourselves to a high standard in a healthy way, holding ourselves accountable is important, absolutely. But being mean to ourselves, constantly criticizing ourselves, constantly pointing out our perceived flaws, that's actually not a recipe for success or fulfillment. And so it's being able to be honest, to be authentic with ourselves, absolutely, but be kind and compassionate when we make mistakes, which we will, when we upset and offend other people, which we will, not ever, usually ever intentionally. It's important to learn from that, but we can learn better through compassion than we can through self-criticism.
Very powerful. And it's so funny because I can relate to that. It's so often we're worried about that compassion and that kindness and when we're coaching others and we want to see them grow, but then we're really hard on ourselves. So absolutely love it, Mike. Thank you again for joining me today. Hang tight for just 1 second while I take us out of the show, if you would.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit, an awesome episode of the Leadership Toolkit with my new friend, Mike Robbins. Again, check out his website, check out his LinkedIn. I'll make sure and have links to that in the description of the show. Do me a favor, throw some thumbs up on the show. That's one of the ways that this show can continue to grow, whether you're watching on YouTube or Spotify or listening on Apple, whatever method you're using to consume that content, please do me a favor and throw some thumbs up and some likes on that. And then also, very important, if you know somebody that would benefit from hearing the conversation Mike and I had today, please do me a favor and share it with them. It's one of the most powerful things that you can do for somebody. Share this with someone that needs to hear the message and help them grow. Thanks everybody for tuning in and joining me today, and I'll see you next Wednesday on the Leadership Toolkit. Talk soon. Stay great.